Okay, can y'all hear me? I call the meeting to order. Can we have a time of reflection, please? Okay, thank you. The next item is to adopt the agenda. Can we get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second. Discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, Jody, can you run us through the sunshine law?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Jody Brooks, and this meeting is subject to Florida's government and the sunshine laws, and based upon the Executive Emergency Order 2069, we are able to have this meeting by communication media technology. The purpose of a special meeting is to take action on changes in the corporate headquarters programming. And because it's an action itemed meeting, we will have public comment. And I would like at this time to have Shawn Eads walk us through that process. We do have quorum. The meeting is being recorded and minutes will be taken. And so we're in good order and good shape to proceed. But if Shawn can walk us through the public comment period, that would be wonderful.
Sure. This is Shawn Eads, JEA's red. It looks like a microphone with a line through it. That is your mute button that you will use during the meeting. You'll stay on mute other than our board members until you're recognized or until there's a moment in which you've been asked to provide the comment, and then you can click that and unmute yourself. Then everybody will be able to hear you, and then we ask that you click mute again just so that we can make sure that we minimize the background noise as the board continues to do their business. If you'd like to see who is in the meeting, you can also click on the participants. If you move on your screen, you'll see about 4 buttons over from the left, a little person. If you click on that, it turns blue. On the right of your screen, it will bring a listing of all of the participants. You should see your name at the very, very top, and we'll get back to that in a minute. And you'll be able to see everyone else that is attending the meeting through the WebEx technology. If you happen to have any issues during the meeting and need to let me know, you can click on the 5th little button over there. It looks like kind of a caption bubble. It brings up the chat window. You can chat to everyone, or you can select Shawn Eads and chat with me, and we'll do our best to make sure that we're doing everything that you need. Please understand, this is a public meeting and completely recorded, so anything that you would put in a chat obviously would be for everyone, so let's just make sure that we do it appropriately. When we get to the public comment section, what we will do is we'll do it in 2 parts. For those using the technology I've been describing, we will use a raise hand capability. If you look in the participant window that I had spoken of and I talked about your name being at the top, you'll actually see a gray hand image. If you click on that, it will actually show as raised for me on this end, and I will then recognize you, and it is your turn to provide comment. If for some reason that is not, you can't find where that is, you can also chat in the window that you would like to provide public comment when we reach that point, and I will recognize you and give you the time that you have. If you dialed in and it looks as if we have about 6 to 7 people that dialed directly in, because for JEA it's really important for us to give lots of opportunities for people to participate. If you dialed in directly, your phone is on mute right now, and when we reach that point, I will ask you if you want to provide comment to please unmute your line. That can be done by pressing *6. You'll state your name, and then we will recognize you and move forward. So that is the technology. We do have the ability to mute you on my end. I will only do that if we hear background noise and I'm trying to make the meeting more effective. If there happens to be a reason that we have to escalate anything, I obviously can remove you from the meeting, but have no intention of doing that at this time. So that's how we will proceed. I know we have about 5 minutes before the 1 time is up. Jody, do you want me to actually run the public comments now?
Well, we say that folks have into the first 10 minutes of the meeting. If we run them now, we potentially have to run them again. Is there something that we could move to on the agenda? If Mr. Beckton, Mr. Chair, I don't need to take over the meeting or the agenda. But if we don't provide enough time for the public, if there is a public comment during that window of time, we just want to make sure the public has the ability to have input into this decision-making process.
Absolutely. What is Danny Beckton there?
Thank you, Chair, Mr. Baker. I appreciate the opportunity, but I don't have anything at this time.
Can't you talk for 2 or 3 minutes?
Probably, but I'll save you the time.
Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, what I can do is run the public comment for those, and then we can circle back on the email when the 10 minutes is happened. If
Let's
you
do
prefer that. Great.
That works.
So at this time, if like I had described before, because we have some time, I can describe again. If you would like to provide public comment using the WebEx technology, I ask that you click on the little person icon, bring up your participant list, and you can click on the hand to raise your hand to allow me to know that you would like to provide comment. You can do that at this time, or you can chat that you would like to provide public comment. And I will see if anyone would like to. Not seeing anyone that way, I will then go to if anyone dialed in directly to the call. Again, there's about 8 folks that have done that. If you would like to provide public comment, I ask that you hit *6 on your phone. That will unmute you. If you could then state your name and your intention to provide comment. So at this time, none of the participants in the active meeting are wishing to provide public comment, Mr. Chair. We've probably got about 90 seconds left. I can start by asking Madrika Jones, has there been any public comments provided to us in email to this point?
No, I don't have any at this point.
Then we get to wait probably another 78 seconds or so and see if any more come in.
Okay.
So we'll have an extended moment of reflection, Mr. Baker. So according to all the global timekeepers on the internet, it is 3:40. Madrika, has anyone provided you a public comment?
No, I don't have any.
The meeting is back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the adoption of Corporate Headquarters Committee Charter. Jody Brooks, can you talk to us about that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the committee meeting last week, we presented a draft corporate headquarters committee charter that provides for the roles, membership, how the meetings will be conducted, and the responsibilities of this committee. And so it just provides a detail of the purpose of the committee, and we need to get someone to provide us a motion to approve it, and any discussion as to whether or not to finalize the charter.
We have in the charter that there are 3 members. I thought we only named 2.
No, sir. You have the 3 members are the chair is chaired by. Where my notes go? It's chaired by Mr. Stein, and then the 2 members on the committee are General DiSalvo and Mr. Van Osdal.
Okay, great. Thank you all for serving. Can we get a motion to approve it?
Move the motion.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we've got that, and now we'll turn it over to Bobby Stein for the corporate campus project review.
So, Mr. Chairman and the rest of the board, and just wanted to kind of walk through. We heard the presentation of our changes. We can walk through. Stuart, if you could walk through those quickly, and then there's 4 or 5 items that we were working through to get this thing completed after negotiations. I think we are there with Ryan and Company, and I want to thank Paul McElroy for his help, Nancy Kilgo for her help always, and CB Richard Ellis and Ryan and Company. It was not easy to get these endpoints done, but I appreciate everybody's cooperation here. So with that, I'll hand it over to Stuart, and then when we get to the parking, I think Paul has a parking update, and the next piece after we've reviewed the campus project, the question is, what's next on the 40,000 feet that I think we have a plan, and I think we can move quickly on that plan, but we can quickly go over that. So with that, I'll hand it over to Stuart.
Bobby, and members of the board, good afternoon. Bobby, just so I'm clear, do you want me to go over the terms that we've been negotiating, or the aspects of the building that we have been programming for?
I think we quickly go over the overall building program so everybody can comment on that quickly, and then go through the changes we've made to go ahead and get approval and discussion.
Okay. So in general, the program shift, as we call it, has gone from 196, or is proposed to go from 196.9 to 153 plus or minus square feet. The other aspect of this is to whether we remove 1 or 2 levels in the garage. There's roughly 99 spaces per level. And then the other aspect of this is whether or not we impact the building with further resiliency or resolve that by outside efforts. And then finally, whether we take the recommended value engineering aspects with regard to the exterior of the building and leave it for the most part as it's currently rendered and approved by DDRP. So those are the primary program aspects that we have asked you to consider over the last few weeks.
So Stuart, what I go to is where we are today and what we'd like to move forward with as far as to get approved and moving back to staff to complete this process.
Right. So as you can imagine, a program shift of this nature requires a lot of different data and information, and so we're working on a lot of different fronts. We're trying to get direction on the primary aspects of the building, as I previously described, and the target rate resolving for hardening in a separate facility. The target square footage is 153 plus or minus square feet. So we're asking for your approval to get your staff to fine tune that. And then we're also asking
153,000. Yeah, 153,000. Yeah.
Sorry, 153,000. And we're also requesting that you advise us if we should get rid of one or two levels, and then the other two things I spoke of, which are is it your intent to upgrade the resiliency of the headquarters, or can we solve that outside in a separate facility, in a hardened facility? And finally, can we resolve the exterior elevations of the building by keeping the existing value engineering efforts that we've done to date without going any further and possibly jeopardizing any DDRB approvals or reapprovals further?
So, Stuart, I think would it be worthwhile is where we've landed, so people, where we landed on all aspects of option 3, so people can discuss that option and then go through every aspect. And then when we get to parking, I think Paul can give us an update on parking that gives us some comfort of what we're trying to do.
Okay. Yeah, sure. And by aspects, you mean the items we've been negotiating with Ryan?
I think go through what we're recommending, from, I think we're recommending 153,000 feet. We're recommending to retain the lead gold. We're recommending, just go through everything we're recommending so everybody can walk through it if there's any changes. And then at the end, Paul walk through the parking and then talk about, going from 15 to 20 years, everything that we've agreed to, I think. And then I think we hand it over to staff and Paul to finish the last piece of this negotiation. But I think the big items, let's walk through option 3. I think that's where everybody feels comfortable with, and let's just make sure we go line by line through that process.
Sure. So,
Bobby, if you don't mind me adding, if we could go to the second page of the slide deck and just walk through those quickly. This is an abbreviated version of what we used last Friday at your committee workshop, kind of project focus and where we needed decisions made, and then go to the next slide. And I think Stuart can pick it up from here based on the visuals.
That's great.
Yeah. So actually, if you would go a slide back, please. I know we've previously talked about the items on the right, which we'll cover again, but the items on the left are, as you recall in prior conversation, the intent is to, in parallel, deliver in a program shift like this, a valuable design. So we want to maintain a high value in the building. We want to make sure that the moves we're making are comfortable from a workplace standard standpoint, and focusing on the employees and the safety and security of both those employees and the ratepayers in the service you or the JEA is providing. And so in tandem, we want to make sure that the value of the design and the program match the program economics, so that in the end we're still getting a high value for the building we are paying for. So the direction, as I previously mentioned, on the right. So next slide, please. So with the recommended target, assuming that JEA wants to resolve for hardening outside of this facility. The majority of the functions still stay in HQ. This solution does allow, as previously mentioned, the hardening in a separate facility, keeping in mind that the headquarters as designed is designed at the highest code for Duval County. And again, the modifications to this program still maintain a high level of value. The recommendations also avoid significant delays and jeopardizing those approvals as previously mentioned. And so, given the modifications recommended, we do think it matches the highest savings and value to the program. Next slide, please. You can see the reduction in the elevation. We are removing approximately removing 2 floors of the facility with slight modifications to some of the amenities, which are in line with the approximately 220 full-time employees that are going to be relocated to a hardened facility or other areas. The top left image is obviously the shortened image. The bottom right image is your prior design that was approved in January by JEA. Next slide, please. So the gross rent reduction of this option, shifting from 196,900 square feet to 153 square feet plus or minus, is $27 million in lease payments and rent reduction. That from option 1 to 3, that's a net impact of 10 to 14 million in the program costs that Ryan will see. And then there is, as we've again previously discussed, an expected savings in operations of between 19 and 35 million based on what your current spend is in your current facility over the next 15 years, including some critical aspects that require immediate attention. Next slide, please. So the recommendation is a target of 153,000 square feet, approximately 650 parking spaces. That would reduce your parking garage by 2 levels, and then a resiliency impact in a separate 40,000 square foot facility, hardened facility. And then finally, we are maintaining photovoltaics on the building, LEED Gold. And while we've reduced the size and count of terraces in some of your amenities, they've stayed in ratio to the people that we are moving out. So that is the recommendation in option 3 that we've studied. Next slide, please. Finally, you can see the comparables of where you are now with 952 employees. Option 3 in the HQ location, not including the hardened location, but in the HQ location, you'd still have 784 people plus or minus, depending on how many we move. And then your square footage is 360,000 currently. You'd move down to 153,000. You can see, if you skip down 2 lines, the impact to your real estate consumption from 320 square feet per person to 170 square feet per person. And I would note that you have several neighbors in the last few years that have built similar buildings in Jacksonville, Florida, and are much lower than 170 square feet per person. So that is of note. And then your parking, you currently have 513 spaces. You actually would have more in your HQ, in your new headquarters. And then your seating factoring in approximately 15% vacancy. And vacancy applies to, for health reasons, paid time off, business travel, any of those things. And we would typically recommend and see somewhere between 10 and 20%. So your seating reduction, your program would go from a seat per person to a seat per 0.85 people. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so Bobby, I think I turn it back over to you, sir.
Yeah, I'll turn it back to Paul to go through his discussions with the city and others about parking.
Thanks, Bobby. We have talked about, right now the plan that Stuart laid out has a 2-floor reduction. We thought and discussed about having just a 1-floor reduction and leaving that open and potentially as leasing that to other governmental entity. In a discussion with the city chief administrative officer during a meeting with other agency heads today brought up the headquarters location. And we had a discussion, and the city, through the mayor's office, indicated that there had been discussions with the state's attorney and the DIA, and that they were going to take care of parking, and that we should move on with our building. So, I think with that said, as we continue to think about the number of people and the parking spaces that we have on the remaining floors, thinking about the workforce and how people will be situated. We've got a couple of years before we actually move in there, and given what we've learned with telecommuting, given what we're learning in terms of distancing, there may be additional spaces that free up, and plus the fact that the density, that the employees that we may move to the other site may have some level of density or higher density, which could free up some more spaces. And at that point in time, we would look to make those available to the state attorney as well. So I think we've got a good solution there that lowers the construction cost of it's roughly $1.6 million, and we see that as part of the rent reduction. I think we end up with a good solution in terms of making sure at least the city is informed and taking care of our neighbors, and we've got cost reduction as well. That's it, Bobby. Unless you want me to go through the other components.
Yeah, why don't you walk through the other components of what we've agreed to, and then let's work through this building, and then we can get to go forward thoughts on the 40,000 square feet. And I can give you my thoughts too. Great.
So the conversations with Ryan in terms of the size of the building moved from, we had a lease that had a range of on the small end 165 and the high end of 196, I think that Stuart mentioned earlier on. And we at 153 we fall below that. So we've had some negotiation back and forth, and I think what surfaced out of those negotiations are just some additional value for JEA. Ryan had offered, because of the reduction, they'd offer an additional 5 years fixed into this lease with the existing terms of the lease, and there's one good exception, couple of good exceptions to that. Initially, it was just standard terms and conditions and rent escalations for an additional 5 years. Through negotiations back and forth with them, we've got a couple of other value-added options for JEA. The rent escalation in the 5-year extension, years 16 through 20, would be reduced from 2.5% to 1.25%. Additionally, we would have a construction savings agreement up to $500,000 in construction savings. Working together with Ryan, we would share 40% of that, and they would have 60% to have incentive to create that value. And then finally, in year 16, turning the page from 15 to 16, it would be set aside for a $1.5 million or $10 a square foot tenant improvement allowance to help refresh the building. And so we add all of those to the underlying lease, and we end up with a 20-year commitment with a pool of funds to help with refresh in years 15, end of 15, going into 16. We reduce the escalation in the last 5 years, or the additional 5 years, 16 through 20. The existing lease still preserves 2 more 5-year renewal options, so making total potential for 30 years, and the $500 savings, construction cost savings agreement, which could produce another $200,000 value for JEA. And that would be certainly
Nancy. Yeah, but Nancy, on the ratio, is that right? On the savings?
I think that the agreed upon split would be 40% to Ryan and 60% to JA. I wasn't sure what I heard. And Mike Carroll can correct us if that's not right.
No, I think that's right.
That's better.
Yeah. Yeah. So any, I hand it back over to you on this section, John, and any comments, questions?
Mr. Chair, this is Dr. Haley. I have a question going back to kind of the square footage of the building. We have 153,000 square feet plus or minus. So what's going to drive the plus or minus by how much, and when will we have to make a final set of decisions on that?
Bobby,
Stuart, you want to take it, and then I'll
Sure.
follow up.
Sure. What drives the plus or minus is really your program efficiencies and exactly what and who are going to move to the hardened facility. You have, in any program, you have adjacency requirements, who needs to sit next to whom. That's those kinds of things, and specifically how the structure is manipulated slightly. So where people are moving from floor to floor, we have a slight flexibility in our patio. So there's some square footage there that we may want to take advantage of. So there are some other aspects that I think, and we would ask that your staff be charged with finalizing, and that's really why we say 153,000 plus or minus.
And Leon, to add to that, the reduction of the terrace size and count, we're going to have to go back to DIA and work through that. So that's, not a considerable amount of space, but it's, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 feet. So there's going to be some work to be done, but I think this is where we can hand it off to staff.
And Bobby, if I could weigh in, a lot of Stuart's calculations from last week were very program, people, number of square feet per person driven. In reality, removing 2 floors gives us a certain amount of square footage. There'll be building standard calculations once the building's done. So we would work with the building elements that we have, and that puts us closer to 153. It will be very close to that number. But this is assuming we take out 2 full floors, rework terraces, and basically the building will be the same.
Leon, does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Hey, Bobby, Joe DiSalvo.
Yep.
Just for the employees, where the existing headquarters, and you see the reduction, 784 at the asterisk, just so there's no angst, the size of the building, as we decrease the square footage, does not mean a reduction in the JEA employees. It's because of those 200 plus or minus full-time employees that would be working in that separate hardened, the 40,000 square facility. I just say that so folks who may be monitoring in don't
point.
equate that, so I just thought I'd add that. Thanks.
No, Joe, thanks. That was a great point.
And once again, if I could ask if we could have you all discuss and make decisions on this recommendation, and then separately briefly talk about as a separate project scoping for the Hardin facility and starting to look at site selection for that. If we could get your direction, the combination of those two make up the full option 3 when we get to the lease summary in a bit as the next item. That will focus on the Ryan HQ project, not that separate Hardin facility.
I mean, my suggestion, Mr. Chairman, is we finalize this and then we talk about what we need to do on the Hardin facility.
Okay. I have one question. Why do we have 137 more parking spaces than we currently have?
Mr. Baker, I can answer that. We have almost 900 people or a little over in the building. We don't have enough structure parking now in the current headquarters. We're bound by the 2 garages that we have. So a lot of people park off-site in lease space. The intent here was to get close to having full parking for the employee complement. And part of this 650 versus 784 takes into account Stewart's vacancy recommendations.
Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, should you want to move to the Hardin facility?
Do we want to approve this, John, and then go to the Hardin facility, or how do you want to do it?
I thought you just said the other. I think it's more appropriate to approve this.
Yes, I agree.
And there's a resolution in your materials, resolution 2020-05, authorization of the Second Amendment to the lease agreement. Is there a motion to accept that?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Tom Van Osdol.
Further discussion?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, but who made the motion?
This is Zachary Faison.
Okay, Dr. Faison. And then Mr. DiSalvo, you made the second?
No, it was Mr. Van Osdol.
Okay, Van Osdol, thank you.
Thank you.
And I know that you're about to go into discussion, but Paul McElroy in some of the negotiations mentioned a couple of other terms that I don't know that has gotten captured in the summary. So if the motion is to adopt the resolution with the attached exhibit summary to include the items that Mr. McElroy mentioned earlier on the rent escalation reduction, and the construction service savings and the TI allowance for the year 2016 or year 16. Is that what I remember hearing? My notes aren't. I can't even read my own handwriting. But if the motion can include those other items, that would be. I would like to see that part of the motion.
Okay, and do we need to amend the motion then? According.
Yes, sir. If you don't mind, if the motion can be amended to adopt Resolution 2020-05 as amended per the prior discussion by Mr. McElroy.
Do you accept that, Zachary?
Yes, yeah, I accept that amendment.
Tom?
Yes, accept.
Okay. Further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay.
So, John, on the Hardin facility, this is my suggestion, is I think working with Nancy Kilgo and Jordan Pope with the JEA and CB Richard Ellis is willing to help us come up with sites. And I would ask and recommend that you and Paul, work with that group of people to find a site. And I'd be willing with anybody else to look and start looking for a design build firm and start putting up criteria of what we exactly want for that building and start move as fast as possible to, pick a firm, pick a site. And I think this will be a little bit easier since we're going to own the facility. But my suggestion, if you and Paul wouldn't mind, is help us find a site, and I will help look to work with Nancy and Stuart on the design build team. I'd suggest we go with the design build team, and that's up for discussion. That would be my thought, John.
Okay. Thank you, Bobby. I'm happy to do that. And I have one question that I don't know who to ask it to, whether it's Shawn as an IT guy or Paul. Is we're building the second facility to be resilient. Is it good practice to have your backup facility 2 blocks away or 3 blocks away? I mean, does it make any sense to have both of these facilities downtown? If a tornado were to come through, or do we not use the headquarters as a backup at all?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I think there's trade-offs on both sides of the equation. I think there is value in having proximity, but that assumes that this is a sufficiently hardened facility that will withstand anything that might disrupt business and business continuity in the headquarters location and in other downtown areas. If that's the case, then having proximity is helpful in the event that we just have, not that absolute catastrophic issue, but sort of that Hurricane 2 or 3 level where there is constant disruption downtown, but then we can sort of move back and forth between the buildings.
I think another important point, John, you got to look at is logistics. I mean, Paul, you might.
Oh, absolutely. I think that, the downtown important. I mean, one of the things we got to do is just verify in the sites and lands that there's appropriate elevation there, that we have reduced as best we can to the point of almost eliminating flood risk, and then making sure we've got dual feeds and backup generation, and then basically access to the major highway system, 95 in particular, for access in and out of the facility. So I think all of those are the important factors in terms of when we look at the hardened facility, that we've got the electricity, communications. It is hardened, to withstand Hurricane 5 and flooding, backup generation, dual feed, and the basically transportation in and out from major arteries. And
the other point I make, John, is the being in proximity to the police and fire emergency center. I mean, Paul, you might.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, there's constant flow back and forth between and a tight communication, and quite frankly, that's one of the great values of having a locally owned community utility, and that you have that not only tight communication, but there's a complete integration between the city and police and fire, emergency management, and the utility operation. So having that proximity is also helpful.
Thank you.
Hey, Bobby and Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Just in all that said, this is Joe DiSalvo. Also, you can obviate some of the problems by, if you do it right, you got to activate this EOC before the disaster. You got to make the decision. You're going to transfer all the command and control equivalent, from the headquarters to the hardened facility, and be prepared to operate that way, self-sustained for 3 or 4 days or something like it. But when you do that, at least you don't have to worry about, do you have access to that facility, because you have already moved all the folks in it and all the necessary additional support, before the road structure and transportation and access may be interdicted because of the weather. So a lot of this goes to what everybody's saying, proximity, but then also procedures and making the decision to get that thing activated and get the folks and capabilities up and running before the disaster hits, and then you're good to go.
Thank you.
Absolutely, 100%. And I just, for the board's information, just a little sidestep here. Next week, the utility will be having a tabletop exercise, live tabletop exercise, incorporating all of the utility involved in an emergency response for a hurricane. And so we'll exercise all of our processes and communications. It starts out with 5 days out and builds up to living through the eye of the storm, and then the recovery and asset deployment necessary for that. So we'll spend 2 mornings, and we've got about an 8-hour exercise, actually 6-hour exercise involving the utility. Thank you.
If there are no further comments on that, I've got one update. We met John McCarty of purchasing, and Angie Ayer, who is Paul's special assistant for HR, and I have gone through all of the presentations for a search firm for the CEO. We reduced it to 4, and we had interviews with the 4 this morning. We think we've got the one, and what I would propose to you all is let us talk to them, and as well as talk to the others, and then in 2 meetings, board meeting, we'll be prepared to announce who the search firm is. I think you'll be pleased. If there's nothing else to come before the meeting, we can adjourn. Is there anything else anybody wants to bring up? Jody, do we have to amend Tuesday's agenda to include the search?
No, sir. It's already an agenda item for next Tuesday for the recruitment firm. I checked it earlier. John McCarthy had reached out to me before this meeting, and I checked the agenda. It's already an agenda item for next Tuesday.
Wow, you're pretty smart.
We're good.
You just have to think it, Mr. Chairman, and it happens.
Okay.
So John and I are putting we may have to get a couple of items put together as far as presentation before the board, but it's an item on your agenda for discussion on Tuesday.
Okay. Well, on that high note, we're adjourned.
Thank you, John.
Thank you all.
Thank you, board members. Thank you,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Have a good day.